Joining me now, Senator Tom Cotton, who sits on the Senate Intel and Armed Services Committee. Senator, our government relies on these tech companies for its communications. And of course, these tech companies rely on China for money. How is this a sustainable relationship, Senator?
Well, Laura, it's not a relationship we should be in with Chinese communists or that some of our leading companies should be in. As you said in the opening, this goes back decades of failures of trying to integrate our economy with China's. And you just saw the spectacle of the Secretary of Treasury going to China and kowtowing and saying that people like you and I are wrong when we say that we should decouple from China's economy so we could eliminate all the threats they pose to our safety and health and our prosperity. So I think Microsoft has some answers to provide here. You know, the reporting I've seen suggests that you couldn't access these accounts in the government just through like an individual key, but it would take something the equivalent of what you might call a master key, and that should have been secure at Microsoft. And how did Chinese communists get their hands on that? But there's also a broader point here that goes beyond Microsoft, and it goes to our government, to Joe Biden in particular. He continues to try to accommodate, conciliate, and appease with Xi Jinping and the Chinese communists, so we shouldn't be surprised that they continue to take these provocative steps. A few months ago, it was sending a balloon to float over China. Now it's hacking into the State Department. Yet what do we see? A continued flow of senior administration officials like the Secretary of Treasury, and soon it's going to be John Kerry talking about climate change, going to China to plead with China to help Joe Biden fulfill his goals. We shouldn't be surprised they're continuing to taking more aggressive, provocative actions against us and our friends.
Now, Senator Cotton, without Republican votes, the Pentagon could not continue doing what the Pentagon does. And we all love our military, that goes without saying. But given the fact that our government is clearly working to enrich China and grow the Chinese economy, how do we keep asking taxpayers to fund this Pentagon at this level? We're certainly not acting like a superpower when China's about to build this base in Cuba, and we apparently have nothing to say about it. So how do we ask the taxpayers in good faith to keep forking over the money?
Well, Laura, what we need to do in the Congress, and what I'm trying to do with others, make sure that we're funding the right things in the Pentagon, the right kind of weapon systems or the troop levels that are going to help deter China, deter their aggression, whether it's more submarines or modernizing our nuclear forces or making sure that our bases in the Western Pacific are secure against Chinese attacks. What we shouldn't be doing is funding the left's and the Biden administration's politicization of our military. Both in the Senate and the House, we've taken some steps to try to stop that. I hope we can continue to do more in the weeks ahead as we consider the legislation in the Congress. But we need to be funding the right things that are going to help our troops deter Chinese aggression against America's interests.
Senator Cotton, I asked this of Senator Schmidt of Missouri last night. I'm going to ask you the same question. Do you think the military has become a hostile work environment to people of strong faith, Catholics, Muslims, Jewish Americans, given the radical turn on racial and gender indoctrination?
So, Laura, I've heard anecdotes about that, some of them coming from people with whom I served, 15 or almost 20 years ago, I guess. I don't think it's necessarily pervasive, especially on the front lines in the company and the battalions and brigades. But clearly, at the higher levels, you have civilian political appointees who are very ideological, who are trying to take steps to politicize the military and to socially engineer it, that we should not ever do with our military, because we need our
Senator, I don't mean to interrupt you, but do you think a devout Catholic would be elevated to become a general in today's military? Like a very, outwardly devout Catholic in this administration would be elevated to the general level?
I do, Laura, and I think that's the case at most levels as well. I don't doubt, though, that there are some ideologues in the Pentagon who are not just focused on religion, they're focused on race, they're focused on sexuality, they're not focused on what's necessary, which is making sure our troops are ready to fight and win our nation's wars, and hopefully, therefore, not having to fight them in the first place.
Yeah, well, we have the Secretary of Navy who just said in a major address at the National Press Club that we are completely outflanked on the naval side by China. I mean, they have, what, 50 more ships than we have. They have a much bigger shipbuilding capacity than we have. And yet our trade policy seems to be geared toward enriching China, Senator. So when the angle was about, this doesn't make any sense, that doesn't make any sense to people who are actually paying the bills here.
Yeah, that's in part, again, because we have been outsourcing so much of our industrial base to China for 20 or 30 years. They've got shipyards that can do all of what American shipyards can do combined. That's got to be a real focus of ours. I mean, we cannot continue to let China to crank out more ships in a year than we can build in 3 or 4 or 5 years. That's all about bringing jobs back to the United States, all about developing skilled workers who are going to get high-paying jobs in places like our shipyards that are going to be contributing to our national defense.
Senator, great to see you. Thanks so much.